Okay, so you want to start a pressure washing business with less than $3,000. You might be thinking you need a trailer, a giant commercial pressure washer, a branded truck, a warehouse, and thousands of dollars in equipment just to get started. You don't. In fact, if you already have access to a vehicle, you can build a lean pressure washing operation for roughly $3,000 or less. But here's the thing. Buying a pressure washer doesn't create a business. Getting someone to hand you $200 to clean their driveway does. And that's what we're going to figure out. Because by the end of this video, we're going to take exactly $3,000, spend it piece by piece, get the first customers, calculate how much we can realistically charge, work out the monthly expenses, calculate the break-even point, and then see what happens if we turn this little operation into an actual company. And there's a reason this business is interesting. A typical driveway pressure washing job can cost homeowners roughly $100 to $350, with around $210 being a reported average. House washing can run from around $100 to more than $700 depending on the property and market. So you're selling something that costs relatively little in materials, but can command hundreds of dollars in labor and service value. Think of it like this. The customer isn't buying water. They're buying back the Saturday they would have spent scrubbing their driveway. And that's where the business starts. So let's say you have $3,000 sitting in your bank account. The first mistake would be to spend all $3,000 on equipment. Don't. Because your pressure washer can't pay your bills while it's sitting in your garage. So we're going to divide the money into 3 buckets: equipment, business setup, and cash reserve. Let's start with the equipment. You don't need the biggest machine you can find. For a lean residential operation, a gas pressure washer in roughly the 3,000 to 4,000 psi range, along with the right flow rate and accessories, can be enough to get started. Current 2026 startup guides put a lean equipment setup in roughly the $1,500 to $4,000 range depending on how professional you want to go. But we're working with $3,000. So we're shopping carefully. Let's allocate about $900 for a decent gas pressure washer. Then maybe $150 for a surface cleaner. And this little attachment is actually more important than it looks. Because imagine trying to clean a 600 square foot driveway with a tiny wand. You'd be walking back and forth like you're painting the entire road with a toothbrush. A surface cleaner turns that into something much faster and more consistent. Then we'll allocate around $200 for hoses, nozzles, a gun, wand and downstream injector. Another $150 for starter chemicals, degreaser and cleaning supplies. And maybe $100 for safety equipment, gloves, eye protection, boots and hearing protection. Now we're at roughly $1,500. And that's enough to get the basic machine doing actual work. But we still haven't created a business. We've just created a very expensive way to make your driveway wet. So now comes the boring part. The part that nobody puts in the flashy TikTok videos. Business setup. Depending on your state and local requirements, you'll need to look into registration, licensing, insurance, and any local rules that apply to pressure washing and wastewater. And insurance isn't something I'd skip just because you're trying to stay under $3,000. You're spraying high-pressure water at somebody else's property. One mistake can turn a $200 job into a very expensive afternoon. As a rough benchmark, MoneyGeek's 2026 analysis puts cleaning business insurance for pressure washers at around $92 per month on average, though actual premiums vary by coverage, location, and operation. So let's reserve around $500 for business formation, licensing and initial insurance costs. That brings our spending to about $2,000. Which means we have roughly $1,000 left. And this is where I want you to do something most beginners don't. Don't spend it. Keep it. Because cash is oxygen for a small business. If your pressure washer breaks, you need money. If your first marketing campaign doesn't work, you need money. If a customer pays late, you need money. If you suddenly get 5 jobs in 1 week and need more supplies, you need money. Having $1,000 in the bank is much more useful than having another $1,000 worth of equipment sitting in your garage. So our $3,000 startup looks something like this. About $1,500 for equipment. Around $500 for business setup and insurance. And about $1,000 stays untouched as a cash reserve. Now we have a business. Well, technically. Because we've reached the hardest part. Getting someone to pay us. And here's where most new pressure washing businesses get this completely backward. They think, I need a website. Then, I need a logo. Then, I need business cards. Then, I need a wrap truck. And 3 weeks later, they have a beautiful brand and 0 customers. You don't need a beautiful brand. You need proof that you can solve a problem. So your first marketing campaign should be incredibly simple. Find neighborhoods with older driveways, dirty siding, patios, fences, and visible exterior buildup. Take before and after photos. Create a professional Google business profile where eligible. Put together a simple website or landing page. And start contacting homeowners. But don't say, Hi, we're Bob's Pressure Washing. We provide premium exterior cleaning solutions. Nobody cares. Instead, Hey, I notice your driveway has quite a bit of buildup. We clean driveways in the area. I can give you a quick quote if you'd like. You're not selling pressure washing. You're selling a cleaner looking property. And that distinction matters. Now let's see you start getting calls. What do you charge? This is where the economics become interesting. Let's take a standard 2-car driveway. Current consumer pricing sources commonly put these jobs somewhere around $100 to $350, depending heavily on size, material, location, and condition. So let's say we start at $200. 1 driveway. $200 revenue. And maybe the direct chemical and fuel cost for that job is relatively small compared with the selling price. But don't look at that $200 and think, I just made $200. You didn't. You generated $200 in revenue. There's a difference. Some of that money pays for fuel. Some pays for chemicals. Some pays for insurance. Some pays for marketing. Some eventually pays taxes. And then there's your labor. But even after those expenses, the economics can still be attractive because you're operating a mobile service business without a storefront. Now imagine you land 3 driveway jobs in a day. 3 times $200. That's $600. 5 days a week would theoretically be $3,000. And 4 weeks would be $12,000. Sounds incredible. Almost too incredible. And that's because it is if you're treating it as a guaranteed outcome. You won't necessarily book 3 jobs every day. Weather will cancel jobs. Some customers will say no. Some neighborhoods won't convert. Some jobs will take longer than expected. And you'll spend time driving, quoting, answering messages, buying supplies, and doing all the other things that don't show up on an Instagram revenue screenshot. So let's build a more conservative scenario. Let's say during your first month, you complete just 20 jobs. The average ticket is $200. That's $4,000 in revenue. You started with $3,000. So you've already generated more revenue than your original startup budget. But again, revenue isn't profit. Let's say you spend $400 on fuel, chemicals, and other job-related costs. Another $200 goes toward marketing and customer acquisition. Around $100 goes toward software, phone, and miscellaneous expenses. And let's reserve roughly $100 for equipment maintenance and replacement supplies. Now you're around $3,200 before accounting for taxes, owner labor, and fixed insurance costs. That's where the business starts becoming interesting. Because the machine itself isn't producing the money. Your ability to sell jobs is. And that means the next question is, how do you increase the amount each customer spends? Because getting a customer to pay you once is good. Getting that same customer to buy 3 services is much better. Imagine someone calls you to clean their driveway. You arrive. You look around. And you notice the patio is dirty. The fence is covered in algae. And the side of the house hasn't been cleaned in years. Instead of saying, "Your driveway will be $200, you say, "I can do the driveway for $200, or I can clean the driveway, patio, and front walkway together for $350. Suddenly your average ticket isn't $200 anymore. It's $350. You didn't necessarily need another customer. You just increased the value of the customer you already had. That's one of the most powerful ideas in service businesses. You don't always need more customers. Sometimes you need more revenue per customer. Now let's imagine you figured that out. Your average ticket rises from $200 to $300. And you complete 30 jobs in a month. That's $9,000 in monthly revenue. At 40 jobs, you're at $12,000. And at 50 jobs, you're at $15,000. But now we hit another problem. You only have two hands. And that's when a pressure washing business stops being a job and starts becoming a company. At first, you're the salesperson. You're the technician. You're the customer service department. You're the scheduler. You're the accountant. And you're the person who answers the phone while standing in somebody's driveway. But eventually, if demand is strong enough, you can bring in another technician. Now your job changes. Instead of spending every hour holding the wand, you can spend more time generating customers, managing jobs, and building systems. And this is where scale becomes possible. But there is a trap. People see a pressure washing company doing $20,000 a month and think, "Easy. I'll just buy a bigger machine." Wrong. More equipment doesn't automatically create more customers. More customers create the reason to buy more equipment. That's why I would actually recommend starting small. Prove that people will pay you. Then reinvest. If you generate $5,000 in profit, don't immediately buy a $15,000 trailer. Maybe upgrade the machine. Improve your marketing. Build your customer database. Get better insurance. Improve your booking system. And keep cash available. Because the goal isn't to look like a big company. The goal is to become one. Now let's talk about the break-even point. Suppose your initial startup spending is $2,000 and you keep $1,000 in reserve. If your average job brings in $200, you need 10 jobs just to generate $2,000 in revenue. But that's not technically the same as breaking even, because you still have variable and operating expenses. So let's say your true contribution after job-specific costs is roughly $160 per job. You'd need around 13 jobs to recover $2,000 of startup spending. That means your pressure washer doesn't need hundreds of customers to pay for itself. It needs a handful of good jobs. And that's the beautiful part of a small service business. You can start with relatively little capital, sell a service immediately, and reinvest the cash flow. But there's one huge reason this business isn't as easy as YouTube makes it look. Competition. The low barrier to entry is both the advantage and the curse. If you can start with a few $1,000s, so can thousands of other people. Which means owning a pressure washer isn't your competitive advantage. Your competitive advantage has to be something else. Maybe you're faster. Maybe your photos look better. Maybe you answer every call. Maybe you show up exactly when you say you will. Maybe your quotes are professional. Maybe you offer packages. Maybe your reviews are incredible. Because customers aren't always choosing the person with the most powerful machine. They're choosing the person they trust to show up at their house and not destroy their property. And that last part matters more than most beginners realize. Pressure washing isn't just pointing water at dirt. Different surfaces require different techniques, and aggressive cleaning can damage surfaces. That's why you don't want to chase every possible service on day one. Start with jobs you understand. Driveways, patios, walkways, certain exterior surfaces. Then expand as your skills, equipment, and insurance coverage allow. And once you've built a customer base, something very interesting happens. The business starts producing an asset that isn't sitting inside your pressure washer. It's sitting inside your customer list. Because next spring, that same homeowner might need another cleaning. Their neighbor might need one. Their parents might need one. Their property manager might need one. One customer can turn into 5. And 5 can turn into 50. That's how a $3,000 service business can eventually become something much larger. Not because you bought a magical machine, but because you built a repeatable system. Find a customer. Sell the job. Perform it well. Get paid. Ask for a review. And if you want to start with $3,000, here's the most important number in this entire video. It's not $3,000. It's 0. Because you don't need to spend the entire $3,000 before you make your first dollar. You can validate the market first. Talk to customers. Get quotes out. See what people are willing to pay. Then buy the equipment necessary to fulfill the work. That's a completely different mindset. You're not asking, how much equipment can I buy for $3,000? You're asking, how little can I spend to prove that this business works? And if you can turn that first $3,000 into $5,000, then $5,000 into $10,000, and eventually $10,000 into a machine, a trailer, and another technician, you've stopped buying equipment. You've started building a company. And that's the real economics of pressure washing. The water is cheap. The equipment is relatively simple. The barriers to entry are low. But the money is made in the gap between finding someone who has a dirty property and convincing them that paying you is easier than doing it themselves. So, could you start a pressure washing business for under $3,000? Yes. But the $3,000 isn't the business. It's just your ticket into the game. The real business starts when somebody gives you the first $200.